Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to AP US History Online. Let's get started where we left off. Today is part two of the period two review, 1607 to 1754, the French, Dutch, and English colonies. So this is going to give us some context, some contextualization for period three, which could definitely be the FRQ, the DBQ essay prompt. Could be period three or period four, we don't know. Could be period five, Civil War. Period six, Gilded Age. Period seven, Progressive Era, World War One, World War Two. We just don't know. But we do know that you can use period two and you can use period eight as contextualization and to create complexity for your essay. That's why, even though the question won't come from period two or period eight, we're still reviewing so that we can get those extra points for contextualization, complexity, because that could tip the balance in your favor to pass the exam. All right, so let's start where we left off. We left off in slavery, the drawing the color line in the Americas. Okay, so slavery in the colonies. If you recall from Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, chapter 3, drawing the color line, right? Slavery is going to start off with Native Americans in the encomienda system with the Spaniards, but the British won't use Native Americans. They'll go straight to the Atlantic slave trade, the West African slave trade. So let's go over this. All British colonies participated in the Atlantic slave trade. Why? Okay, that might be a thing that you could, if they ask, what was a similarity between all the colonies? Well, they all used slaves, even though they didn't need to. You might think, oh, well, slavery, that's for labor-intensive plantation agriculture, like in the southern colonies. Not in this case. Counterintuitively, every North American British colony relied on slavery in some way or another. You have an abundance of land that's going to necessitate a labor-intensive, requirement, and so they're going to use slaves to fill that labor requirement. So, growing European demand for colonial goods, the demand's going to be there. They're going to need a cheap source of labor, nothing cheaper for a capitalist system than slavery. Shortage of indentured servants. After Bacon's Rebellion, when Nathaniel Bacon burns down Jamestown, that's going to dissuade and deter any future needs for indentured servants. So, not to say that like indentured servitude was wiped out after Bacon's Rebellion, but the motivations are diminished. So we're going to have a great need for slavery instead of indentured servants, because slaves are easier to control. New England farms use relatively few slaves. Yeah, so not to say that, oh, okay, all the colonies use slaves and they use them equally. No, you can make the distinction. The northern colonies, the New England colonies, they're not going to use as many slaves. They don't need it, right? But if you own property, you might have slaves to help you farm, help you do tasks that require a lot of labor, a lot of time. So, as opposed to the southern colonies and the New England colonies, slaves even had rights. So, they would be able to take you to court if you were violating their, human rights. So, it's a different way to look at slavery. The port cities, right? Boston, New York, well, in the north, yeah, Boston, New York would be the biggest port cities. They're going to have a requirement, they're going to have a necessity to have slaves. Um, in the south, there's a different story. They have labor intensive plantation agriculture. They're going to have huge numbers of enslaved workers. Um, so, tobacco plantations, they're going to have the gang system. And in the southern plantations in Georgia, for instance, or in Jamaica or the Bahamas, they're going to have the task system on the rice plantations or the sugar plantations. So the chattel principle, okay, chattel going back to legal terminology in England, chattel being like property, right? Chattel can also loosely if you look at the the root of the words, chattel like cattle, right? It's like property. It's a commodity. So eventually, this is going to be the dominant labor system in the southern colonies. No more, kiss indentured servants and their contracts goodbye. They created strict racial systems that prohibited interracial relationships. So these are going to be the slave codes that will eventually, that's why this is so important. We have slave codes here. You can link it to period 5, link it to period 6 with contextualization or complexity in regards to, oh, well, after Civil War and Reconstruction, we have the black codes. Just change the name of slave to black, and there you go. Same thing. It's going to dictate the way society controls the lives of these minority groups. So these are defined descendants of African American mothers. They're going to be enslaved perpetually. That means if you're born to a enslaved person, even though you weren't a slave, sold as a slave, you are a slave because you were born into slavery. Um, so any descendant of African American mothers, even if the plantation owner was white, even if the plantation owner was super wealthy, you're born and your mom is black, well, you're going to be a slave. Um, and we have to focus on, okay, well, how did slaves resist? Well, a lot of different ways. They, worked slow, broke their tools. They had all out resistance to slavery by forming a revolutionary movement, right, a resistance movement using actual like violence. That's another way. They maintained their culture, right? They sung their African lineage songs that they remember from their homelands. So by preserving their culture, they resist the dehumanizing aspects of slavery. Um, One particular all-out rebellion is the Stono Rebellion, and you have to commit this to an example you could use or contextualization you could use for your DBQ if it would deal with slavery, because slavery will establish its roots in period 2, but it grows and expands in period 3, period 4, period 5. I mean, you can use it in all those units, and that's why we're covering period 2. So, in the Stono Rebellion, 20 Black Carolinians met near the Stono River, hence, why it's called the Stono Rebellion, stole guns and powder from a store and killed the two storekeepers. And so, up until this point, it was the largest slave uprising in the colonies prior to um, the American Revolution. Because you have the Stono Rebellion, right? And you can connect Nat Turner's Rebellion. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different slave uprisings, excuse me, that you can connect. So after the Stoner Rebellion, what's the change of continuity? Well, they're going to make restrictions on slavery. They're going to tighten the slave codes. Slaves can't own property, can't leave without permission. They can't possess firearms. They can't testify against whites in courts, and they can't learn how to read or write. Okay, so it was not successful. It didn't do that much damage. I mean, it is horrible that they killed 20 innocent people, 20 whites. There's no justification for murder. However, it's going to make life way worse for slaves after this. Okay, so let's practice some of these AP exam questions. Okay, so let's take a look at this prompt. This could be a DBQ prompt. Explain the causes of the development of the institution of slavery in the period from 1607 to 1750. So this is a classic, DBQ prompt for period 2. Okay, and it'll draw in period 1, it'll draw in period 3. So I'm going to give you a minute to come up with a thesis statement, right? That not only makes a claim in response to the prompt, but also establishes a line of reasoning using outside information, using using evidence, using examples. So, hey Google, 1 minute on the clock.
Okay, 1 minute. And that's starting now.
Hey Google, stop. So let's go over what a possible thesis could have been. So let's identify the skill here, as we do when we break down the prompt. Causes, that's causation. So the historical thinking skill is causation. That'll drive the way we write our essay, okay? Just the causal chains, the causes and the effects. So we know that the scope is going to be the institution of slavery, time period, period two, and so why is slavery going to develop, right? So possible thesis, possible argument. They're making a claim. Slavery in the colonies originated from the growing demands for cash crops, exports, and the substitution of indentured servants with African slaves in the British North American colonies. So, we have it nuanced. They say economic reasons. Um, you could also maybe cultural reasons as well. You could even throw in political. Go for the easy three: political, economic, social. Um, so, economic, cash crop, exports. We have the system of mercantilism. You'd have to talk about mercantilism. Yes, mercantilism. It's not communism, right? It's not socialism. It's mercantilism. It's rooted in a system that needs slavery for cheap labor to make as much profit as possible. That is the driving force. Now, um, indentured servants, that's going to fall into line with, well, it could be cultural, it could be political. Indentured servants, it's a different source of labor, which is part of economics. It's going to have a different system that is, kind of with the outbreak of for instance, Bacon's Rebellion, that's going to dissuade the use of indentured servants because indentured servants are typically white and they're going to demand a lot more needs and a lot more rights than slaves. Okay. So we would move on to analyzing the documents. We're not going to analyze 7, we're going to analyze 3. So what evidence do each of the following documents provide for this question? Okay. Let's take a look at the first document, number of indentured servants and slaves per probate inventory, York County, Virginia, 1637 to 1705. So we have two plots, indentured servants versus slaves, okay? And we have to look at the data, we have to look at the timeline and see, okay, when does one start to decrease and when does one start to increase? And I'll give you a hint. Think of Bacon's Rebellion. Hey Google, put 30 seconds on the clock.
Sure, 30 seconds. And we're starting now.
Hey Google, stop. All right, folks. So in this document, we see a decline. The black dots, that line is the use of indentured servants. We're going to see a decrease in the mid 1600s because of Bacon's Rebellion. All right, that is what is a turning point, watershed moment for the labor systems that were used in North American British colonies. Slaves per inventory, well, we see it rise in the mid 1800s. Or sorry, in the mid 1600s. That's because if you're not going to use indentured servants, you got to use something. You'll use slaves. Okay. And Virginia. Hey, they're trying to give you a hint, guys. In Virginia, okay, Jamestown, Virginia. That's where Bacon's Rebellion happened. There's a direct causal relationship with Bacon's Rebellion and the shift in labor usage in the North American British colonies. Next document, another 30 seconds on the clock. Once again, it's Virginia, guys. So keep in mind, it's all connected. They're trying to show you the causal line, trying to connect the dots. Hey, Google, another 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay, 30 seconds. Starting now.
Hey, Google, stop. Okay, in document 2, we have the Virginia General Assembly. General Assembly, it's a democratic institution. However, in this case, they're acting quite not in line with democracy by disenfranchising and taking the rights away from minority groups. But here we have an act declaring different groups, so Native American, Negro, that means African Americans, and mulatto. Mulatto is a blend. It could be part white, part black, right? Doesn't matter. If you're not 100% white, you're going to be real estate, essentially. You're going to be property. Chattel slavery, right? And it's perpetual. That means it never ends. Your kids, your grandkids, they're all going to be slaves. And so this is in direct relationship with what we were talking about. Slave codes. Okay, this is a slave code. Next document. Enslaved people of African descent in Eastern North America. Okay, so here we have the 13 colonies, the different groups, right? The North and the Southern colonies. You could even, the North includes the Middle colonies. Upper South, that'd be kind of like the Chesapeake colonies. Lower South, those are the Southern colonies, right? So, oh, interesting. Are any of them completely one color? No. That means there's slavery in all of them. Now, mind you, some regions are going to have more slaves than others. Let's analyze this document. 30 seconds on the, hey Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay, 30 seconds. Starting now.
Hey Google, stop. All right, folks, so 1750, let's look at the enslaved people. This is towards the end of period 2, but what's happening in the colonies? As you can see in the New England colonies, the northern colonies, middle colonies dash New England colonies, only 5% are enslaved. However, that's a significant number. Okay, doesn't mean, and you can see here, look at the proportion, guys. Estimated colonial population, 603,000 people. Okay, so 5% of 603,000 is a significant number. Now, most of these slaves are going to be in the port cities, right? So New York, Boston, to help with the labor needs in those areas. In the upper South and the Chesapeake regions, we're going to have a huge increase, right? From 5% we go to 36%, because, yeah, they're going to be doing plantation agriculture. They're going to be growing tobacco. They'll even do, maybe grow some rice. Now, in the South, we have the most, 58%. More than half the population is enslaved for the labor-intensive plantation agriculture. Once again, growing sugar, growing rice, it's going to require a lot of labor. And how do you make the most money? You don't pay the workers. Okay, so those were nice 3 documents that we analyzed. Native wars in Virginia. So there's going to be conflict. That's a recurring theme, guys. The Native Americans and the British colonists are going to be in heavy conflict because the New England, sorry, the New England colonies uh, of British North America are going to continually encroach on Native American land. So as the white colonists grow in numbers, they're going to have to spread into Native American lands, which is going to lead to territorial disputes and lead to conflict. Let's take a look at the couple conflicts. First, Powhatan War. So the Powhatan War, 1622, coordinated Indian assaults at about 347 dead colonists, a third of the colony. That's pretty significant. Virginians retaliate. They destroy Indian villages and crops. Women, children aren't spared. It's very brutal on both ends. Second Powhatan War, 22 years later, 1644, natives again tried to expel the British by force and failed. The Susquehannock War, it's a tongue twister, 1675. Okay, now we move on to King Philip's War. This is what you have to commit to memory, guys. King Philip's War, also known as Metacom. Metacom was his real name. The British gave him the nickname King Philip. So Metacom was a prolific leader in New England for a pan-Native American group, right? So multiple tribes were led by him. And he was very successful for 2 years. So causes. English encroachment on Indian lands for agriculture. English cattle destroyed native cornfields. So the English were kind of not that sophisticated. They didn't know how to farm the right way. They didn't rotate their crops. And so they kept growing crops and not rotating, which is going to lead to depleting the land of nutrients and vitamins. And so then eventually you deplete the soil of all nutrients and then you can't grow any crops there anymore. And then what do? Well, you spread and move on. Breakdown of trading relationship between natives and English led to resentment as fur trade slowed and natives lost land. So economics, battling over resources, it's going to lead to resentment, it's going to lead to hostility. The resentment of Christianity because Philip sensed the loss of loyalty to him. So the natives, they're not going to want their culture to be infringed upon, much like any of us wouldn't want a invading force to force their views upon us, right? So it's going to be a fight over culture. It's going to be a fight primarily over resources, primarily over land. Both sides engage in torture and killing of women and children, human rights violations on both sides. Both view as outside the bounds of normal rules of war, right? Rape, torture of animals, and decapitation occurred. So just the most horrific crimes committed by both sides. It's a horrible, horrible chapter in American history. Okay, so here we have the New England colonies, we have Massachusetts. It's just, we can see some of the conflicts occurring during Metacom's war, okay, primarily next to the coastline. Effects of King Philip's Metacom's war. So over half of New England towns were destroyed and the line of settlement was moved back east. They considered abandoning all of New England. So it made quite an impact, folks. 1 in 10 colonists died, making it the deadliest war in American history. Yeah, 1 in 10, 10% of the population died from the war. That is literally decimation, right? Because deci, you all know that. So Phillips, aka Metacom, decapitated head, was displayed in Plymouth Common during the first Thanksgiving since the war. Oh, well, that's what Thanksgiving is all about, isn't it? Well, no. The first Thanksgiving was peaceful, right? The Powhatans and, King Philip or Metacom's tribe were peaceful with the colonists for the first Thanksgiving. They taught the colonists how to grow crops in the rough soil in the New England colonies. And then, so as gratitude, they had Thanksgiving together, but that was short lived. And they're going to have Metacom's head posted for the next Thanksgiving. Not good. Philip's son was sold in slavery in Barbados. Well, that's another slap in the face. Colonists feared that they had lost their identity and became less civilized. Well, once you go in that direction, you start committing war crimes, crimes against humanity. There's really no turning back. It's going to leave a dark stain on the soul of American society. The Pueblo Revolt. So this is an instance, folks, where the Native Americans actually win. Mind you, they don't win for very long, but at least they win for a short period of time. So this is in the Spanish colonies, the Pueblos, right? And this is in the Southwest. So what are the causes, right? We're always looking for causation. See how we're looking at the causes? That's what you would write in your essay. Causation, causation, causation. What caused Metacom's war, right? Oh, disputes over the encroachment of the English settlers on Native American land. What caused the what caused the Pueblo Revolt against the Spanish? Well, it all had to do with these Kachina dolls that were holy for the Pueblo Indians. So the cruelty of the Spanish was one of them. The Onate ordered one leg chopped off after one resistance by Okoma. Resentment over being forced to be Christian, right? The natives aren't going to want a new religion forced on them. Resentment over attempts to control and destroy their culture. Enslavement of natives by Spaniards on the encomienda system, in silver mines, domesticated labor, sexual exploitation, sex slaves. Okay, so these are all human rights violations. So the Pueblo Revolt, the rebels are going to drive out the Spanish. They're going to be effective. They're going to get the Franciscan priests out of there by killing them or by torturing them. So just a mass revolt, 17,000 Indians. And they're going to destroy Catholic symbols. And they're going to go back to the Kachina dolls. They're going to go back to the Kivas. And they're successful for about a decade. And then the Spanish come back. The Empire strikes back. Okay. Pueblo Revolt effects. So causation, right? Cause and effect. What's going to happen because of the Pueblo Revolt? Are the Spanish going to be as easygoing or happy-go-lucky? No, they're not. Okay. So destroyed written records left by Spanish and returned to oral traditions. Spanish were driven out for 12 years, most successful Indian revolt in North America. Yes, got to know it. Upon return, Spanish accommodated themselves to Indians courted rather than conquered. Oh, so instead of ruling with an iron fist, the Spanish are going to try to blend in, try to meet them halfway. Like, okay, you like the Kachina dolls? Well, maybe now we'll have like saints and saint statues, just so it kind of reminds you of the Kachina dolls, right? Please like us, right? Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. Remember to hit the bell for notifications. Southwest was viewed as a buffer zone area rather than a zone as forced assimilation. So instead of trying to really control everything, the Spanish are like, oh, just let them kind of do their own thing, and we'll just have like an area where it's not like the main part of our colony, but it's an area where they can just kind of chill, and we don't want to be too crazy on them because then they'll revolt, and we don't want that. Okay, let's take a look at this document, and we'll do a little hip on this, right? We're gonna either find the historical context, the purpose, the point of view, or the intended audience, right? So I'll give us 30 seconds. No, I'll give you a minute because 30 seconds to read, 30 seconds to hip. Hey Google, 1 minute on the clock.
All right, 1 minute, starting now.
By John Martin, 1622. Hey Google, stop. Okay, so here we have John Martin, or John Martin, and he's saying, okay, he has a plan for subjugating, enslaving the Native Americans. This is 1622. Ooh. So he's saying, okay, look, the natives, they rely on corn. Yes. I mean, today we rely on corn. All our chips are made out of corn. Without corn, you wouldn't have your delicious hot Cheetos or your Takis. So if we take away the corn, if we take away the Takis, we take away the hot Cheetos, they're going to go crazy. That's going to destroy their society. Okay, no one will be able to help them. They might run away, but no one will be able to help them. So that's how we control them. We control the corn, you control the tribe. Um, so, what's the purpose of this document? To illustrate a method for trying to control the Native American populations, right? Um, Historical situation, it's just, and the audience might be, the government or the legislative bodies who would respond in making domestic policy for the with the Native Americans, right? So as a colonist, his point of view is, well, the natives are enemies. They're not our friends. They're our enemies. How do we control them? How do we get rid of them, right? Historical situation, it's during colonization, right? Colonization, there's going to bring hostility against natives. Next, hey Google, minute on the clock.
All right, 1 minute, and that's starting now.
Okay, 30 seconds to read, 30 seconds to hippo. Hey Google, stop. Okay, folks, so the easiest one here out of the hip, not all the letters are going to be as, equally easy depending on the document. Based on what we learned today, we went over King Philip's War, right? You see the word Philip there. Oh, King Philip. Okay, this is in New England. This is in Massachusetts. The Powhatans. Uh, right, they're talking about him. And what are they saying here? Well, it's like this is like a diary, right, or a report that they're making an account of what's going on. King Philip was able to round up all the chiefs in the area to band together and fight an effective resistance against the colonists. And so they're saying, look, this guy, from his point of view, he's saying that the natives were the ones who started the hostility, started the fighting, um, and they just wanted things to get back to normal. As long as King Philip would have done what they wanted, everything would have been fine. But on the other hand, instead, he decided to do not that and fight for whatever reasons he had, right? This guy doesn't really seem to get the, the understanding of the motivations for Metacom, aka King Philip. So I just go with the historical situation, talk about Metacom's war, King Philip's war. All right, next, 1 minute on the clock. Hey Google, minute on the clock. Hey Google, 1 minute on the clock.
All right, 1 minute, and we're starting now.
That's what I thought, Google. Listen to me. Hey Google, stop. Okay, folks. This document, it's kind of like two documents. You have like, okay, obviously it shows the natives burning down villages and houses and stuff. Look, guys, you don't have to be an expert at all there's so many conflicts with the natives. The Pequot War, the Puritan War. There's so many conflicts. You just have to understand, okay, the natives were in conflict with the colonists, the British colonists, over land, over territorial disputes. If we look, okay, look at all those names. You don't have to know all the names of all these cities, okay? Like we saw earlier, if we go back, Warwick, and so that's all in New England, guys. Okay, well, a lot of those aren't on here, right? But look, you have the Wampanoag, all these tribes, they're going to fight in King Philip's War, okay? There's a lot of destruction. We know King Philip's War, okay, it starts in 1675. Okay, and so boom, that's what this document's about. Bam, 1675, 1677, King Philip's War, guys. King Philip's War. Okay, Metacom, wreaking havoc, just dominating, and in the end, unsuccessful. But it's going to leave a lasting impact, a lasting mark on American history and on relations between the colonists and the Native Americans. Okay, so instead of relationships with the colonists and natives, now we're going to look at relationships between Britain and the colonies. Okay. Oh yeah. So for that document, I'd probably use historical context. If you study, the history. You can use historical context in all the documents. Okay. I mean, the purpose of the author is to show the scope, the magnitude of the destruction of the conflict with the natives. Okay. So connection to Britain, the First Great Awakening. Gotta know the First Great Awakening, guys. It's gonna lead to the American Revolution. Period 3, American Revolution it could be the FRQ, it could be the DBQ. And if you're gonna say what led to the American Revolution, you're gonna have to say the roots of the American Revolution are in the First Great Awakening and in the Enlightenment, which we are gonna go over next. So the First Great Awakening is a religious movement that doesn't start in the colonies, it starts in England, okay guys? Enlightenment starts in England. First Great Awakening starts in England. It starts in England and it's transferred, okay? It's transported to the colonies with the information age, right? With the printing press, new books are being written, and so the First Great Awakening. Think about it, guys. Spiritual awakening, spiritual rebirth. It's not just like Eastern religions. It's in Christianity, right? To be reborn or to be awakened, your spirit is awakened. Don't just think, oh, enlightenment, oh, is that about Buddhism and, the nirvana and all that? No, it's Christianity, Are you awake? Do you see, the Holy Spirit? So, enthusiasm, emotional manifestation of religion, weeping, fainting, physical movements led to a burst of conversion. So we see that today, is that, the mega churches, you have people falling down, and I think you've seen it on TV before. I've never really been to one of those gigantic churches. The biggest church I've ever been to was at Notre Dame. So, itineracy, preachers roamed rural and urban areas and held meetings. So they're breaking away from tradition. We're not going to have a big fancy church where there's, the pastor is in control of everything. It's going to be more democratic. Like, why have focus on a big church? You can have little churches, in the forests or wherever, out in the backwoods, to just spread the word, right? It doesn't have to be all fancy and nice and just extravagant, right? So democratic sense is emerging. Everyone should have an experience, not just the preachers in charge of everything. Broke down strong denominational ties. I mean, if it's the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church, it doesn't matter. You can start your own church if you feel like it, as long as you're doing good and you're spreading the word and you're doing good things, right? Challenge religious authority. So you don't need a central, huge, powerful figure. You don't need the Pope. You don't need the King of England. You just need people who are willing to listen and do good deeds and interpret, the word, right? So that's going to lead to the spread of democracy, and it's going to lead to the American Revolution, guys. So key people, Jonathan Edwards. Okay, Jonathan Edwards, huge. Whoa. Okay, it's windy outside. Sorry. That was a weird sound out there. Okay. So, Massachusetts intellectual and writer. Uh, so he's gonna be a prominent figure in the First Great Awakening. Okay. So he's not gonna be. So Jonathan Edwards, guys. I'm sorry. Jonathan Edwards, he's going to be like really big on Puritanism, okay? No salvation through free will. So he's kind of not going to he's not going to be totally on board with the First Great Awakening. He's going to be at odds. Sinners in the sinners in the hands of an angry God. So, this is like brimstone and fire, shock and awe kind of stuff. Let's take a look at sinners in the hands of an angry God excerpt. Hey Google, 30 seconds on the clock. Hey Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay, 30 seconds. Starting now.
Thanks. Google, you're a great friend. Okay, let's read you guys. Hey Google. Hey Google. Stop. Okay, so this is pretty hardcore, guys. This is pretty extreme. Okay, we're sinners. We're all sinners. We should be thankful that we're not dead, because God's the only thing that's holding us up, right? The only reason why we're not dead and in hell right now is because God is holding us up. So you should be happy about that, right? And he said this to little kids too, because that's a pretty harsh thing to bring up with children. But yeah, okay, we get it. Calling people, the congregation spiders and insects. Yeah, it's pretty hardcore. Okay, the effects of this kind of thinking, guys. Well, this is going to be a departure, a breaking away. So splintering with Protestant denominations. So we're going to have these Baptist, Methodist, aka the New Lights, and then Anglicans and Quakers, the Old Lights. So the established churches are going to be weakened. They're going to go out and try to help Native Americans, help African Americans, spread the word. So they're going to be against the big churches. That means the Church of England, the Anglican Church. They're not going to like colonial officials who are Anglican. Excuse me. A democratic spirit. So they're not going to want people who are like the chosen ones, right? They're the elected group. They're the high-ranking officials for the Puritans or for the Anglicans. So they want to, hey, if you're really inspired and you're caught up with the Holy Spirit, you're going to do your own thing. God's not going to just, select a few. If everyone by their own sheer will and their own free will wants to go out and do good, well, then they'll do it. So it's going to unify. It's going to cut across economic, social, and racial lines, guys. It's going to help spread democracy. Okay, so take a look. Let's contrast these two images, guys. On the left, we have the Anglican Church. Those are the old lights. On the right, we have the new kids on the block, the Baptist Church. Look at the difference, guys. Look where the podium is. Is there a podium? Which one looks more democratic? I'll give this like 10 seconds. Okay, on the left, you have the Anglican Church, the old school stuff. Look at the podium. It's in the center. It's like elevated with a spiral staircase. It's very glorified. Look, it's like fancy and columns. And on the right, we have it plain and simple. We don't need fancy stuff. Let's just go out and there's no center seat. Just people talking, people sharing the word of God. Okay, everyone's in the congregation. Everyone's got an equal seat at the table. Okay, connection to Britain. Well, the First Great Awakening starts in Britain, the transatlantic print culture. Okay, so we have a glorious revolution in England where they're going to go against the Anglican Church. There is a separatist movement. They're going to go against, the thoughts of the monarchy, right? So, what's going to spread it? Print culture, new books. Everyone can get the Bible now. Everyone can get newspapers, magazines, articles. People are going to be reading now. Okay, so prior to 1700, news was prohibited from being printed. They didn't want a clash with authority, right? And that kind of rings some bells. You look at North Korea, you look at China, their communist governments, their dictatorships. They manage the internet. They censor the internet. They censor the news. Most news was focused on reports from abroad. Okay, so it was just boring stuff like, oh, we bought 20 gallons of crabs and 50 barrels of turnips, right? Newspapers contain advertisement. Pretty boring stuff, guys. It was nothing to really joggle your brain. Okay, then we think of the Zenger case. So this is before America was even a country. Zenger was a prominent case where he kind of criticized public officials in the New England colonies, and the New England governor. It was illegal to do that. You couldn't talk bad about a public official. So the New England governor brought criminal charges against him, and then the jury, they kind of did a jury nullification issue, and they said, hey, we don't care what the law says. We think that Zenger should have freedom of speech because we don't really like the governor anyway, and you should be able to criticize public officials. So they didn't convict him, and they gave a not guilty verdict. And so that was a victory for democracy, and that's going to fuel the flames for revolution. Okay, so attacking the government through the newspaper is going to be just a catalyst for the Enlightenment movement. Okay, so the Enlightenment movement, the First Great Awakening, are going to lead to the American Revolution. Okay, so by 1776, half the population, half the men are going to be literate. Okay, they're going to be reading stuff. They're going to be spreading ideas. Readers are leaders, guys. Readers are leaders. It's not cringy to say that. All right, let's talk about Poor Richard's Almanac. Okay, Benjamin Franklin. Almanacs were kind of like just fact books that had all sorts of good information. People loved them. I mean, they had like jokes and weather predictions, which were probably wrong, but medical advice, which was probably wrong too. Like George Washington, poor original OG George. He had a sore throat, and they bloodlet him until he bled to death. The medicine advice was not very good, guys. Agricultural info probably not good either. They kept depleting the soil of nutrients. So it was just, I don't know, it was just a funny book. Maybe the jokes were the only things that were good. So almanacs were like an American thing. British people didn't have them. They didn't get it. All right. It's going to bring this like American identity. Okay. Let's look at some of these jokes and see if we can relate to them or they're funny for us. There are 3 faithful friends, an old wife, an old dog, and ready money. Classic. A stitch in time saves 9. Ooh, words to live by. Lord knows I've had to save 9 at certain times. Fish and visitors stink in 3 days. Wow. Interesting. Okay, I have no idea what that means anymore, but apparently people loved it back then. Okay, mercantilism. This is huge, guys. Okay, mercantilism, aka mercantilist capitalism, right? It's not going to be laissez-faire capitalism, but mercantilism, so there's a mother country and there's the colonies, and the mother country uses the colonies for its own benefit, get cheap raw materials, trade routes, and sells manufactured goods to the colonies. So it's very good for the mother colony, not good for the colony. So colonies should benefit the mother country. Wealth, gold, silver, resources, raw materials. You want to export more than you import. So that's a good balance of trade. They want the colonies to send out a lot of stuff and Oh, I'm sorry. For the mother country, they want to export more than they import. Because if you're exporting more, that means you're making more money. If you're importing more, that means you're wasting money, right? If you make more stuff, it's good. If you buy more stuff, it's not good. So, mercantilist policies, Wool Act, Hat Act, Molasses Act, Iron Act. These are just taxes, guys. All these crazy taxes to make money for the mother country. Okay. A key mercantilist law is the Navigation Acts. Okay, the Navigation Acts are going to restrict trade. Okay, so manufactured goods. We see this triangle trade, this transatlantic trade. Slavery is going to be a huge part of it, right? That's part of mercantilism, cheap labor. So back and forth, England, they're going to sell the manufactured goods to the colonies. They're going to trade around slaves, and they're going to get the raw materials. Money, money, money. All good for the mother country. Okay. Now, the Enlightenment. Okay, goes hand in hand with the First Great Awakening. So, the Enlightenment is not a religious movement. It's a philosophical movement, guys. It's like a political philosophy movement. Okay, we're gonna get ideas about laws, ideas about, just governance, society. Okay, that's what this is all about. So, natural rights. Okay, key word for enlightenment. Hashtag natural rights. You would do it with the phases and whatnot. Probably did it with the phases. So, there's certain natural laws that govern the universe that can be applied to humanity, right? Let's use reason. Let's not use emotions and faith. Let's use logic and reason, okay? Let's not just like give up all our rights and blindly, follow a leader with divine right or divine authority. No, we have to treat everyone equally, and we have to listen to everyone's ideas. We can't just have a leader that might not be the best for everyone, okay? John Locke, he's like Thomas Jefferson's biggest follower, right? So Thomas Jefferson loved John Locke, this British dude. He came up with all these treatises on governance, right? We should revolt when a government fails to protect people's rights. We give up liberties for protection. We give up liberties for national security. We can't be doing that. Okay? So natural rights, life, liberty, property. We need to protect that. Protect your property, protect your life, protect your liberty. This sounds a lot like the Declaration of Independence because Thomas Jefferson totally stole, aka borrowed, a lot of this stuff. Okay? Baron de Montesquieu. Okay? Montesquieu came up with separation of powers. Separation of powers, Montesquieu. Okay? That's how you remember that one. 3 syllables, 3 words. All right. Radical Whig ideology. Okay, so the Whigs, okay, they're going to be for individual rights. The Whig Party, they don't want concentrated power. They want liberty. They don't want, because if there's concentrated power, you can have corruption. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? They don't want tyranny. They don't want a dictatorship. So there should be a balance between the representative branch, the legislature, and the king and the central, the executive branch, for instance. So let's look at the Glorious Revolution. All right, we have instances where we try to fight a centralized power. We need to preserve freedom. Okay, and that can only be done with the public input. Okay. This is all going to feed the flames of the American Revolution. Let's take a look at this document, guys. Let's practice with this one. We're going to have to be interpreting data. And we're going to have to see what conclusion can you get from this data, from this information. Hey, Google, 30 seconds on the clock.
All right, 30 seconds. And we're starting now.
And I might have gotten cut off. Value of selected goods exported to British North America from England. Mercantilism. What's happening to the exports? Hey Google, stop. Okay, so England, what's happening with the exports? Okay, make sure you look at the title correctly. From England to the North American colonies, we see a lot of exports. So Britain loves that. They're like, bam, we're selling wool, we're selling more everything, cheese. The colonists have to buy it. Haha, we make more money. The colonists don't like that, guys. They're like, dude, we have to buy the British stuff, even when the French and the Spanish sell it cheaper. I don't like it. Okay, so today's lesson's over, guys. 4 big ideas to keep in mind. Number 1, the goals and patterns of colonization varied among. Okay, so among the colonies, guys, there's going to be different patterns, different goals for colonization. In the British colonies, there's further variation, right? The key factor is climate, the environment. Different regions are going to have different environments, and it's going to have different economies. The reliance of slavery is going to be more prevalent in the South because of the plantation agriculture, for instance. The soil types in New England, they're going to be rocky, so they're not going to grow a lot of crops. They're going to have more fishing. They're going to have more natural harbors. European nations are going to have different relations with the Native Americans. Some are going to be chill with the natives, like France and the Dutch. Some are going to be hostile, like the British, right? Spanish are in between. They are okay with marrying them. They were lonely Spanish conquistador soldiers. Right, so at first the colonies are pretty strong with Britain, but then they're going to start to drift away. The policy of salutary neglect, guys, is going to come to an end. Britain's going to get real strict after the French and Indian War, which is toward the end of period 2. French and Indian War is going to be a turning point, a watershed moment. Okay, England's going to have a lot of debt when they beat France, and they're going to tax the colonies, okay? And that's going to change everything. The colonists are like, oh my gosh, it's not working out. We're done here. All right. End of the period 2 review, guys. Wonderful work. Very proud of you all. Let's study hard, and let's make sure we get our DBQ practice in. Have a good day, everyone.